Hello, everybody. My name is Joshua Ahmed. I'm the founder of RealEngineers, and what RealEngineers is effectively Google Translate between hardware engineers and recruiters. And this all started in my time at Lockheed Martin. My job was to put all these complex avionics together, and to do that, I had to build a team of software engineers and RF engineers and electricals. And during that time, I found out when it came to my software engineers, there's so many ways to vet them before the interview. There's, lead code tests, there's all sorts of tests, and ultimately their GitHub, I can go see their code. When it came to my hardware engineers and everybody else, there was nothing equivalent to do that. Which is a big deal because if you just look at college degrees given in the engineering school, 2/3 of all engineers are actually represented somewhere in the hardware umbrella, mechanical, electricals, and those, and the rest are actually software engineers. So this is a huge lot of people who have never felt something like a lead code to demonstrate their skills. And you would think AI is making a lot of things better, but this is one of those places that is actually not. So there's a lot of ways it's making it worse, but two of my favorite is that it's turning into a spy versus spy game, whereas one AI trying to convince the other one that it's a real human and they're a good fit for the job, and then the AI is trying to figure out that you're an AI. And fundamentally, what I realized is that the more candidates optimize their resumes through AI, the more like each other they look. So it becomes like a resume convergence where people look just like each other because AIs are just optimizing for the job. And a good example of this is something that happened in real life even before AI was a thing to me at Lockheed Martin. So I wrote this job description, gave it to my internal tech recruiting team, and I said, hey, was this a job for the F-35 Joint Fighter? So at the LinkedIn title level, he seemed like a perfect fit, had a PhD in aerospace engineering. He applied for the job. One of the keywords we used was waveforms. He used the word waveform as well, seemed like a perfect fit as well. Then we got to the interview and we realized he meant waveform in the aerodynamic sense and we meant waveform in the electromagnetic sense. It's actually not a fit at all. And we were like, how did you make it this far? And so fundamentally, one of the problems is like, okay, the data's missing, but also there needs to be people who need to understand that data, especially early on in the hiring process. So what the problem really is that recruiters are not engineers. Almost every other thing that comes away from that is a pain point from that fundamental problem, is that recruiters aren't engineers. So all the burden is on the engineers to explain themselves, quote unquote, perfectly, so recruiters can understand it, and when they don't, they rely on surface level information to make sense of it, just like job titles and things like that. So how do we solve this problem? Well, we let both sides speak the language that they're good at. How do engineers normally speak? Through their actual work, right? If you're a mechanical engineer, it's your CAD drawing, it's your circuit diagrams, whatever it is. So there's no extra thing you need to learn to make a real engineer's profile. It's your work that speaks for itself. Second, we explain that to the recruiter in simple terms so they don't have to be experts. Our goal is that a recruiter who's never hired a mechanical engineer before on day one can use this tool, can feel like they've been hiring mechanical engineers for 5 years because they would know all the nuances that it takes to learn all that information. This is my favorite slide because it's a practical example of what happened with one of our first recruiters using this tool and one of our first engineers using this tool. The job asked for proficiency in single board computers, and the recruiter was looking at their resume and they didn't even notice when the engineer said, I'm proficient with Raspberry Pis. And I asked the recruiter, I was like, hey, it's right there. It's like, why is he talking about Raspberries or Pis? I'm not sure what's going on. So we pumped him to RealEngineers and he uploaded his actual Raspberry Pi circuit diagram that he connected to the robot. And RealEngineers came out with one sentence for the recruiter and said, Raspberry Pi is a brand of single board computers, so it actually applies to the job perfectly. And the recruiter just looked and said, how many people have I knocked out with this little nuance of information that I never even knew to even look at? I didn't even know what question to ask. And how many people did I knock out because of that? So yeah, so fundamentally that's it. The engineers just talk the way they want to talk, and recruiters get to be like expert recruiters who quite close have an engineering degree when they make hiring decisions. The value of this market is really huge, especially right now with our target being third-party recruiters. It's around $12 billion sum. Our go-to-market strategy right now is starting with early career engineers and third-party recruiters. And we really believe the product has a chance to do product-led growth. And so every engineer that signs up, they usually didn't work on a project themselves. So almost all my new engineers are already coming from their friends of friends of friends. So we're trying to make sure that flywheel is very, very good. And next, our flagship feature, which is they share their dynamic profile, which is a RealEngineers link, just like a GitHub link or LinkedIn link, with a recruiter. And if a recruiter can get value within it in 10 seconds, they get to share with other engineers. So it brings in other recruiters by the very act of engineers using it. And so we need to get that flywheel down perfectly. And that's why we have partnered with 6 design partners so far, some representing our potential customers like the Judge Group and Higher Rising that hire mechanical engineers and our target audiences perfectly to get that loop perfectly into a well-oiled machine. Our best hypothesis right now, there will be a fair deal when engineers sign up to pay $150 per seat per recruiter while engineers stays free. As far as the competition goes, the closest competition I found is a company called GitRoll, and they do something similar, but just for software engineers. They look at your GitHub and they try to make sense of it for the recruiter and give you a grade. And we differentiate ourselves, obviously, with not just our niche, but we look a little deeper than just giving you a grade on how good your CAD drawing is. Right now, we are in the process of finalizing the loop. So we launched our first version in May, and we're like on our 4th or 5th version already, and we're trying to make sure on this version that that loop I showed you is perfectly and well-oiled. So a lot of you are probably wondering, what about classified information? What about NDAs? Well, my answer to that is, if you focus on the math, if you focus on the science, there's actually a lot more you can say about the technical work you did than you would ever think. And that comes from my experience at, getting interviewed at SpaceX or Blue Origin, where you have to talk about your work and you can't get around it. And so I found great ways to get around that. And yeah, right now, this is what my team looks like. I have experts helping me out. Our funding roadmap, it looks, right now we're on our pre-seed round. We're raising. And then for our seed rounds, we'll be going to the real, if you remember my old saying, it is be GitHub for hardware engineers. Well, that's still part of it. And we're going to really answer the question of, okay, you've uploaded your stuff. Why should you keep uploading your stuff? And that's going to be what's going to make this tool special, because it's going to be a great tool for recruiters, because it's going to be a great engineering tool for engineers. And that comes later on in the future. Right now, our main goal is Microsoft. They already own LinkedIn. They already own GitHub. So if they want to keep their dominance in the space and this software becomes what I think it is, they're going to want to keep their dominance. And obviously, there's a lot of other ones that want to take position in that. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Yeah, so we are in closed beta right now, so it's invite only. So the 6 design partners, as far as recruiters goes, because that's all I can handle, and for engineers, I have about 40 engineers with around 10 to 20 waiting in the wait list.
If anybody wants the microphone, okay. Yes, we are recording this, so if you would step up to the microphone with your question, that would be great, or we can hand it out to you.
But the final thing is, the goal for Traction right now is to make sure every single one that comes in leads to another one. That's the real goal right now. Go up there. You got to go up there.
The competition right now, there's only one other.
That I would, well, so we're in the same space. There's others in the same space, like resume optimizers. There's hundreds of companies that are doing that. You can just look up Facebook doing that. And then there's the Robo Applies, and their strategy is completely different, but I still consider them in the same space because they're trying to help you get a job, right? But their strategy is, we don't really care what the truth is. If you apply to 1,000 jobs, you're bound to get one hit, right? Versus my strategy is more about, what's that little piece of information, Raspberry Pi, and that's going to get you a job. And then the other closest is GitRoll, but they're applying something close, but to software engineers only.
Okay, so basically, there's no competition.
I mean, we are still competing for the same cognitive space as for those engineers.
Thank you.
You mentioned about the Git role for software engineer, which basically scans through the actual code you write in GitHub and validate the candidate's experience. So similar to that, so more than just scanning through their resume, do you actually scan through their work? Like, I don't know how exactly work.
That's exactly right. So that's why I put a half red on GitRoll. So what GitRoll does is, to make it easy for recruiters, is that they say, you're a B+ coder. And that's kind of the end of it, right? The difference in mine is a Raspberry thing. Or another example we had two people upload their CAD files. One guy optimized for weight and the other guy's optimized for strength, right? So we actually looking at like, what are the scientific concepts underlying? They're both CAD files. They might have both gotten an A+ as far as good at CAD files. But if you're optimizing for weight, you're probably way better at aerospace companies. Versus if you're optimizing for strength. So that's that level of detail that we go into that Git role isn't going into.
Okay, so in the hardware engineering space, basically, there also it is about programming related. Like I don't know, is it CAD is like a actual program?
I'm sorry, actual program.
The CAD file you are mentioning, is it like a
So
program for hardwares?
All CAD, like the example I gave, all CAD programs today have an export to PDF button because that's the final version of your thing, and so that's what we ingest.
Oh, okay.
But because of that data, I can tell what kind of CAD thing you built a ball bearing for aircraft.
Oh, okay.
That's a very different ball bearing for cars, right? Because you got to make sure there's enough holes in it, so you optimize for weight. That level of information that you can only get by studying it.
Okay, makes sense.
We surface in seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joshua.